Working with Prores files is much easier in programs like Final Cut and Premiere than the H.264 files recorded internally on cameras like the Panasonic S1. It's uncompressed data, so the computer is having to do much less work to read the files. But today I'm looking at the difference in image quality when working with externally recorded files. Can you see a difference between the 420 8-bit and the 422 10-bit that you can record internally and externally on the Panasonic S1? Now personally I find the settings a little bit confusing on the camera, so let's look through what we've got. I've got the Vlog upgrade, which means that I've got access to the MOV recording option. This opens up a whole load of new recording types, and we're going to focus on 2 of those for this test. We've got the 422 10-bit long op 25p in 4K. To put it simply, in case you're unsure, long op means that the camera is saving whatever pixels it can from the previous frame, which are the same, rather than generating a whole new frame each time. That would be called all I or all intra. Most cine cameras have this as an option, but it results in far larger file sizes, so mirrorless and DSLR cameras tend to just use long op recording formats. The second testing option internally in camera is 420 8-bit long op. The main reason I'm testing this is because of the HDMI output options of the camera. The 2 main options we have for HDMI record output are 420 8-bit and 422 10-bit, but either way we can only do this in 50p or 60p, there's no 25p option. Because we're in the UK, we tend to use 50 and 25 rather than 60 and 30 like you do in the US, so I'm going to stick with 50. But the point is that I can't do a straight comparison between the 25p internal and a 25p external. So to sum that up, the 4 test options are internal 420 8-bit 50p, external 420 8-bit 50p, internal 422 10-bit 25p, and external 422 10-bit 50p. This way we can compare the 8-bit and the 10-bit options both internally and externally. And just in case you're wondering, the reason why I'm bothering to include 8-bit at all is because if you want to shoot internally and externally at the same time, that would have to be in 8-bit, not 10-bit. The easiest way to demonstrate the difference between 8-bit and 10-bit colour is to show how many shades of a colour can be displayed in an image. So here we've got the Panasonic S1 recording it internally on its full frame sensor, 422 10-bit, and if we put a grade on that where we really push the contrast, you can see that there is quite a nice soft fall off, and it's still a really smooth curve even though we're really pushing the grade. And then in comparison with that, here's the Super 35 cropped 8-bit 420 50p from the Panasonic S1, and you can really clearly see the banded colours here, so a huge difference between those 2 options recorded internally. If we move over to the external recording, both options are on that Super 35 crop because of the output options of the camera. So if we're output into 50p, you do see some banding here on the 420, but I don't think it looks as bad as it did on the internal image. And then this now is the 10-bit 422, and the banding looks better again. It's still not quite as smooth, but obviously when you're not working with that full frame sensor, it's never going to look quite as smooth. But that just demonstrates to you the difference between 8-bit and 10-bit. Inevitably, a full frame sensor is going to look better than a Super 35 crop of the sensor. A larger sensor allows you to gather more light, and so there's always going to be a much sharper and cleaner image. But if we're comparing the 50p options, if we set the camera to externally output a 420 8-bit image, so we can record internally on camera as well as externally on the monitor, we can do a direct comparison between the 2 options. So here on the left you've got the internal image, and then on the right you've got the Ninja. You can't really see a huge difference in the image, but here with a quick grade, you can see when we swipe between that it's a slightly flatter image that comes out of the camera, interestingly. So the Ninja seems to add a little bit more contrast and punch. It's interesting to see how the colour shifts slightly as well. Now if we crop into 200% on the same image and focus a bit more on the background elements, because that's where the noise is really starting to show, the difference here is really quite noticeable. So the internal image is displayed on the left, and look at the banding in the lighter areas in the background there, and also the noise in the darker areas. It looks much worse on the camera internally than it does on the recorder externally. So already we can see that there's a huge benefit to using these external recorders when shooting with cameras like the Panasonic S1. If we change the settings over to the 422 10-bit image, in theory the results are going to be even better. Of course now we can't record internally at the same time because of the limitations of the camera, but we can record a separate clip after that's just in 25p rather than 50p. So this is that image from the Atomos Ninja, and here it is with a quick grade. In comparison, here's a similar shot using the Panasonic S1's internal full frame sensor. Obviously now we're at 25p, not 50p. If we crop these two images in and match them, even though I'm zooming in even closer on the Panasonic S1 internal image to try and match the cropped sensor of the externally recorded image, I think the noise is actually looking better on the internal image here, so it really shows you how great that full frame sensor is. The banding and the noise looks great in both options. I think the internal image is slightly better here, despite the fact I'm having to zoom in even more to try and match the Super 35 crop on the external recorded image. If we put the 25p option to one side and just look at the three 50p options, you can see that the 422 10-bit image on the far right here is looking absolutely fantastic. There's very little noise in the background, and there's almost no colour banding across the lighter area at the bottom of the frame. So now we're going to look at a test that's going to really challenge the codec. So first off, with our full frame 10-bit internal camera recording, the grade card there is at 80% on the exposure, and I'm just going to put a really extreme green grade on the footage, and then using the Aladdin's RGB controls, I'm going to cycle through a few different colours and just see how the background holds up. So now we've gone to a green colour on that green grade, and if you start to look at some of the shadow areas, you can see a little bit of noise in the background. This is kind of a much more extreme grade than you're ever likely to want to do on some footage, but it just shows what the codec's able to withstand, and in general it's not looking too bad. There isn't a huge amount of noise in the dark areas. You can see a small amount of noise on the back wall there, but I mean it really doesn't look all that bad to me. So now if we swap over to the Ninja's 422 10-bit recording, obviously that's on the Super 35 crop. This is that extreme green, and already you can see that the noise is worse here on this shot. So again, just really demonstrating how much better full frame recording can be. But the more fair comparison is between the two 420 8-bit recordings, so Super 35 in both options. So the top half of the frame here is the internal recorded image, and the bottom half is on the Atomos. If we go from the white light to the green light here, it's really interesting to see that the Atomos is clearly recording a darker image, a more contrasty image, than the Panasonic does internally. There's a slight colour shift, but in general they're quite similar. If we crop in here to 300%, you can really see the difference in the noise between the internal and the external recording, and actually it's noticeably worse on the external recorded here. I think in most circumstances the Ninja V does provide a slightly sharper and crisper image quality, but here when we're really pushing the colours and the grade, it really doesn't handle this very well. Another thing that's worth mentioning is when you're on the 422 10-bit record option, rather than going into the 420 8-bit, you can actually use a different slow motion record setting on the camera, referred to as high speed video, which you'll find under the image format record quality setting. So if you take this to be in the 50 frames per second 4K option, it's kind of doing the same thing as changing to the 420 8-bit, in that the footage that's being recorded is 8-bit 420. Here it is in comparison with the recorded 420 8-bit, so there's a slight colour shift, but the quality of the footage is the same. What's strange is that if you then go to the quick menu, you can't change any settings here, and it displays the recording as 25p, not 50p. The result of the footage coming in as 25p, not 50p, means that it isn't really recorded in true slow-mo, so when you try and slow this footage down, you've actually lost a lot of frames. And it causes issues with your external recording as well. The monitor does not interpret the footage as 50p now, it interprets it as 25p, and as a result, you can't slow it down in post-production. So here you can see that it's listed as UHD 25 in the top left corner, and then if I change the camera settings to be 420 8-bit 50p, now it displays as 50, and so the footage will record correctly in slow motion. If you try and slow down footage that's recorded in 25p to 50p, obviously it looks really weird and jumpy like this because there's half the right number of frames, as opposed to a nice smooth 50p shot like this. So in terms of what's the best option, the internal 422 10-bit does do the best job in all of these tests because the full frame sensor is absolutely magnificent. And although in certain very extreme circumstances the Panasonic S1 internally does seem to do better than the Ninja offers a much more gentle roll-off between different shades of the same colour. The Panasonic S1 is an incredible camera, and you can record fantastic footage internally on the camera, and I've done that for plenty of professional jobs. But the Ninja offers an amazing screen with fantastic monitoring capabilities, redundancy recording, which is fantastic in case you ever have SD card problems, and those Prores files that your computer's going to have a much easier time working with. The Atomos Ninja just adds a nice little extra touch to make your post-production life that little bit easier. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.